Not everything you're about to hear can be explained, and maybe that's the point. In the quiet hills of Eldom Ridge, something impossible happened. One winter night, every man, woman, and child fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. No signs of illness, no answers, and for 30 days, the village was silent. What happened to the people of Eldom Ridge, and why do they avoid the subject even now? Hi there, I'm Jack Holloway, and this is Whisper Files, a place where mysteries unfold slowly, so you can unwind, drift, and maybe fall asleep along the way. Tonight, I'm bringing you a strange and quiet story, one that has no clear ending and no certain beginning either. But before we dive into it, let's take a moment together. Wherever you are, in a warm bed, on the couch, or maybe watching the snow fall outside your window, I want to thank you for letting me be part of your evening. Just take a deep breath in and let it go. You've done enough today. The world can wait. Right now, there's nothing more important than your comfort, your peace, and your rest. If you'd like, you can close your eyes, or just let them soften and stare into the dark. Let my voice do the thinking for a while. Let the stillness of this story carry you. I also love knowing where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. So when you wake up, feel free to drop a comment. I read every one, and if you enjoy these sleepy mysteries, whispered stories with a little darkness and a lot of calm, I hope you'll consider subscribing and tapping the like button. It really helps the channel grow and keeps me whispering into the night. Now, our story begins in a quiet, snow-covered village, a place with no internet, no traffic, and no rush. Just simple people, frozen air, and a secret that still has no explanation. A secret that, for 30 days, held an entire village in silence. They called it a medical anomaly. Others called it a miracle or a warning. But for those who lived it and never speak of it, it was something far stranger. This is the story of Eldom Ridge, the village that slept for a month. The last normal day, it was the kind of morning that made time feel slower. Eldom Ridge, tucked away between two narrow hills and a long stretch of silent forest, sat under a blanket of new snow. Not the hard gray snow you find after cars and boots have stomped it into slush, but a pure, quiet kind of white. The kind that swallows sound. The kind that makes even the wind feel like it's walking on tiptoe. The houses in Eldom Ridge were old, not broken, just lived in. Painted wood, tin roofs, brick chimneys, each one with its own story, its own creak in the floorboards, its own way of settling into winter. Some leaned a little to the side. Others had porch swings that swayed even when no one pushed them. But none of it felt eerie. It felt real, steady, the way small places do when the world forgets about them. That morning, December 5th, was just like any other. At least, it seemed that way. Morning light. By 7:30 a.m., the sun had climbed high enough to paint the windows gold. Light spilled through the frost on the glass, casting patterns on kitchen tables, on worn wooden floors, on unmade beds where children had thrown back the blankets. Mrs. Caroline Hicks, a retired schoolteacher, had already been awake for hours. She always rose early to tend her cats, 3 of them, all rescues, and to brew a pot of coffee strong enough to wake a bear. She said it kept the mind young, even if the bones disagreed. She liked her rituals: coffee, radio, birdwatching. Next door, the Geller twins, Abby and June, were running late for school again. "Don't forget your coats." Their mother, Monica, was tying shoelaces with one hand and buttering toast with the other. "Coats," she shouted from the kitchen. But Jack liked the sound of tools, the feel of grease on his fingers, and the smell of cold metal. The girls giggled and tumbled through the front door, scarves trailing behind them like ribbons in the wind. Up the road, Jack Whitlow, a mechanic by trade and a quiet soul by nature, was already in his shed, oiling the hinges on an old snowmobile. He didn't have to. It still ran. Some people find their church in buildings. Jack found his in engines, a place built on routines. Eldam Ridge wasn't big, 41 residents, if you counted the 2 newborns. No gas station, no police department, no internet. They helped each other shovel driveways when the snow got too deep. But there was a general store run by an older man named Francis Lee, who could still do math faster in his head than most people with a calculator. There was a schoolhouse with a single classroom, a tiny post office, and a chapel with a bell that had Dan T. rung in years, mostly because no one ever died or got married anymore. The people here weren't rich. They shared, they bartered, and they kept their problems mostly to themselves. That's why, when something strange finally did happen, no one was watching. No one expected the silence to be different from any other silence. The last delivery, the Geller twins wanted chocolate powder for snow day hot cocoa. Around 10 a.m., a delivery truck rumbled up the path from Stonevale, the nearest town 20 miles away. Tommy Grace was behind the wheel, 24 years old, shaggy beard, always humming something with no real melody. He brought bread, milk, canned goods, and whatever special requests people had left by the roadside the week before. Caroline Hicks had asked for cinnamon. Jack had ordered engine oil. It was cold, and people had things to do. But usually, someone waved or shouted hello. Tommy didn't knock. He never had to. He left the parcels in boxes, neatly labeled, always placed exactly where folks expected them. As he turned the truck around, he noticed something odd. No one had come outside. Not unusual, maybe. Even Jack, usually tinkering near his shed, wasn't in sight. Afternoon shadows by noon, the light had shifted. In Eldam Ridge, the sun dipped early in December. Long shadows crept across the snow like slow-moving fingers. Caroline Hicks had finished her crossword and was watching the feeders in the backyard. Chickadees flitted between branches. A blue jay swooped in, loud and showy, scattering seeds across the snow. Inside, her cats napped in a pile. One opened an eye briefly when the clock chimed 1, then curled back into sleep. In the schoolhouse, Miss Langley taught the children about glaciers. She drew maps on the chalkboard, told stories about how the earth had once been covered in ice, and how time moved differently when measured by stone. Abby raised her hand to ask if their village had ever been covered in glaciers. Miss Langley smiled. Maybe, but that was long, long ago. The heater buzzed. Pencils scratched. The day went on. Signs in the stillness. By 3 o'clock, the air felt heavier. The wind had stopped completely. Not a single branch moved. Even the birds had gone quiet. Francis Lee stood in his shop, sorting coins. He thought he heard footsteps behind him, but when he turned, the store was empty. He chuckled to himself. Probably the floor settling. At the chapel, the bell rope swayed ever so slightly. By 4, most of the village had gone indoors. Curtains drawn, fires lit. The sun was gone. Evening meals and quiet voices. Supper in Eldam Ridge was a quiet affair. Families didn't rush. They gathered, shared food, talked about little things. At Caroline Hicks's place, the radio played soft jazz as she stirred soup on the stove. Jack Whitlow didn't bother with a full meal. He reheated leftovers and stood by the window while he ate. He liked the view, the hills glowing faintly under moonlight. He didn't think about it again. Slowly, the way quiet places fall asleep. One lamp flicked off here, another there. Blankets pulled up to chins, doors locked, stoves banked, but no one remembers what. No one woke up to see it. No one felt it coming. There was no flash of light, no tremor, no warning, just sleep, deep, total sleep. One by one, every resident of Eldam Ridge slipped into it. Not for 30 days, the quiet that followed. The first night passed without a sound. The world in Eldam Ridge seemed perfectly still, as if the village itself had taken a deep breath and simply never exhaled. The snow continued to fall, quiet and patient. It blanketed the rooftops, drifted against doorsteps, softened the edges of fences and windows, and yet the silence wasn't peaceful. It wasn't the kind that comforts you while you rest. It was too perfect, too complete. A kind of silence that made even the wind seem absent. No chimneys smoked the next morning. No footprints formed along the paths. By mid-morning, a squirrel hopped across the yard behind the Geller house and stopped cold. There was no motion from the window, no barking dog from next door, no clang of pots from the kitchen. It tilted its head, then darted away as if spooked by nothing. Birds began to avoid the feeders. Dogs, left out in kennels, did not whine. Their bowls froze over. Their bodies were curled in corners, breathing steadily, eyes shut, unmoving. At Mrs. Hicks's house, her radio still played softly, the same track looping over and over, never turned off. The cats were still, eyes closed, curled in warm corners. Her soup on the stove had gone cold. The fire had burned down to ash. He delivered, drove home, ate dinner with his grandmother. Just a soft, mechanical voice telling her the mailbox was full. Tommy never stayed overnight. By 10 p.m., she was pacing by the window. By midnight, she called his cell. No answer. In the morning, she called the garage in Stonevale, where Tommy usually filled the truck with gas. They hadn't seen him either. By noon, she called the local sheriff's office. A deputy named Harris was dispatched up the ridge just before sundown. He didn't return. His last radio message was a brief, static-covered statement. "There's something wrong up here. I think you'd better send more." Then silence. From the outside inward, traveled slowly. Eldam Ridge wasn't the kind of place people checked on. It had no mayor, no police, no scheduled deliveries, besides Tommy's weekly run. The people there liked to be left alone, and the rest of the world was happy to let them be. But now, something was off. On the second day, another deputy and 2 medics drove up in a rescue vehicle. They returned 3 hours later, pale, confused, and carrying a sleeping infant wrapped in blankets. The baby was healthy, but wouldn't wake. Eyes closed, heart steady, deeply asleep. They said the same thing. Everyone's in bed. All of them. No signs of struggle, no injuries. They're just sleeping. Doctors from the regional hospital were called. The National Guard was informed. A helicopter circled overhead the following afternoon. From the sky, Eldam Ridge looked untouched. No smoke, no signs of life, no movement, but no signs of death either. It wasn't a crime scene. It wasn't a battlefield. It wasn't anything the world had a name for. The Cold Journal, a medical team, set up a perimeter on the main road, half a mile outside the village. They built a heated tent. They wore hazmat suits. They carried Geiger counters, biological scanners, and satellite phones. One of the field medics kept a journal. His name was Simon Bell. He had served in remote areas before, seen disease spread through isolated communities. But this was different. Day 1, no signs of trauma, no visible illness. All villagers show stable vitals. No fever, no swelling, no burns, just unconsciousness. Day 2, still no awakenings. Residents appear hydrated. Pupils respond to light. Brain activity is minimal but present. Day 3, beginning to doubt this is a biological event. Simon began walking the edge of the village each morning, as close as they were permitted. He carried a notebook and a camera. The camera failed on day 4. Batteries drained within seconds. He wrote, "Even the wind doesn't blow here. It's like stepping into a vacuum. My ears pop on approach, then go silent. The air feels thick, as if it's holding something. Not a smell, not a sound, just presence." He stopped writing on day 6. No one ever found his last entry. The first week, outside Eldam Ridge, the world began to whisper. A few local papers ran small headlines. Sleeping village baffles doctors. No sign of harm, no sign of life. A radio host made jokes. Another speculated about gas leaks, tainted water, or secret military testing. Online forums erupted with wild theories, aliens, psychic fields, spiritual punishment. But the truth was simpler. No one knew, and those who visited the village rarely spoke afterward. Some were reassigned. Some requested leave. One doctor, when asked at a press conference, paused and said, "I'd rather not talk about that place again." The government released a brief statement, something about ongoing investigation and environmental containment. They referred to it as Event 47, a placeholder. Unofficially, it was known by a different name, the Stillness. One more look. On the 7th day, the clouds cleared. A cold sun shone down on Eldam Ridge, lighting up rooftops like soft gold. Icicles sparkled. Snow glistened like crushed diamonds. But the village remained still. A team was allowed inside for 1 hour. They recorded footage, took samples, and monitored the bodies. They were instructed not to speak to anyone, only to observe. In the footage, you can see the Geller twins lying side by side in their bunk beds. One of them clutches a stuffed rabbit. The other holds a mitten in her fist. They look peaceful, too peaceful. Caroline Hicks rests in her chair. Her glasses have slid halfway down her nose. A crossword puzzle lies open on her lap. Jack Whitlow is by the window, seated on a wooden stool, head tilted to the side. He still wears his coat and boots. The snowmobile is parked outside, untouched. When the silence wouldn't break, the 30th morning began like all the others, cold, still, dimly lit by a pale, gray sky. A thin crust of frost covered the windows of the field tents just outside Eldam Ridge. Soldiers moved slowly, quietly. They spoke in low tones. No one liked to raise their voice near the border of the village. There had been no change for a month. Inside the ridge, behind the wooden fences and frozen roads, every soul remained asleep, breathing, warm, alive, but unreachable. Doctors had stopped trying after the second week. No medication worked. No physical stimulus made a difference. Light, sound, touch, nothing brought a response. Some stayed longer than others, hoping for a sign, but one by one the experts left. And those who remained spoke less each day, afraid to disturb a silence that felt too absolute. And then, just after sunrise, it happened. Not with noise, not with movement. It began with the smallest change imaginable. One deep breath. A nurse named Eliza Craig was walking her morning loop around the edge of the quarantine zone. She always paused near the bend in the road, where the frost lay heaviest, where the trees opened wide enough to glimpse the heart of Eldam Ridge. That morning, she paused, not because she saw anything, but because she felt something. She would later describe it as a shift in pressure, the way your ears pop before a storm, subtle, internal, hard to explain. She stood still and waited. And then, in the window of the little chapel, something flickered. Just once. A curtain, perhaps, or the glint of rising light on glass. She wasn't sure, but when she raised her binoculars, she saw something else. A puff of steam, no larger than a sigh, rising from the chimney of Carolyn Hicks' home. The awakening at 7:31 a.m., every clock in the village began to tick again. One by one, alarms went off, buzzing into empty rooms. The door to Jack Whitlow's shed creaked open in the wind, and inside their homes, the people of Eldam Ridge stirred. Not slowly, not one at a time, but together. All 41 residents opened their eyes at the same moment, as if responding to an unseen signal. They sat up, blinked, rubbed their eyes, and for a few long seconds, each of them looked around their rooms with confusion and calm. They did not panic. They did not scream. They did not speak. They simply rose, dressed, and began moving through their homes, as if waking from a very deep nap. But something wasn't quite right. Missing time, Caroline Hicks poured herself a cup of coffee. She stood by the window, watching the birds, feeling the weight of her cardigan, the heat of the stove. It all felt normal, familiar, and yet wrong. Her soup pot was still on the stove, crusted with cold film. Her radio was playing static. The calendar on her wall read December 5th. She frowned, unsure. Next door, Monica Geller was calling for the twins to hurry up. They'd be late for school. But when she looked outside, the snow was too deep. The schoolhouse was dark. There were tire tracks in the road, strange ones, wider than any car in town. At the same time, Jack Whitlow stepped outside and felt a pain in his legs, as if he'd been sitting too long. He frowned at the state of his workbench, covered in frost stiffness. He stretched. He looked around. He didn't remember falling asleep there. He didn't remember much at all. Emergency protocol by 8:05 a.m. The perimeter tent was in chaos. One soldier shouted, "We've got movement in the village." Another yelled, "All of them are up." I repeat, all of them. The lead medic grabbed his radio. "Activate full protocol. Notify Central Command. Condition yellow." Within 20 minutes, a mobile unit was rolling toward Eldam Ridge. They wore full protective gear. They carried monitors, translators, scanners. When they arrived, they found the villagers awake but disoriented. No one knew what day it was. No one understood why people in uniforms were speaking through megaphones. And no one could answer a single question about the past month. Because, to them, only one night had passed. Questions with no answers. Caroline Hicks was one of the first to be interviewed. They brought her to a field tent and wrapped her in blankets. They gave her tea. She thanked them politely, then asked why everyone was acting so strange. When told it was January 4th, she smiled and said, "No, I think you must be mistaken. Yesterday was Tuesday. I made soup." But the soup had long since spoiled. The Geller twins couldn't remember anything either. They were bright girls, talkative. They asked where their school books were and why the windows looked different. Even the baby, who had been taken out of the village earlier, had woken up quietly in the hospital, blinking up at unfamiliar faces. She had gained weight. Her body showed signs of growth, but her parents swore they had only put her down the night before. Every test showed the same thing. Metabolism had continued. Hair had grown. Nails had lengthened. But minds blank. No dreams. No nightmares. No visions. Just a black, featureless space where 30 days should have been. The village speaks. After 2 days of questioning, the government gave up. The villagers returned to their homes, still wrapped in confusion. They were told it had been a gas leak, that they had been rescued, treated, and monitored. Most accepted this without question. They were tired, cold, distracted by the work of daily life. But a few began to notice other things. Mrs. Hicks' cats were thinner than she remembered. Jack's engine had rust on bolts that should have been greased just yesterday. Francis Lee found new stacks of boxes outside his shop, packages he never ordered. Someone had been here. Strangers had touched their things. The illusion began to crack. But no one pressed too hard, because something deeper than confusion had taken root. Fear, not of the government, not of science, but of the blankness inside them, of the fact that none of them could remember closing their eyes. The church bell, a week later, the chapel bell rang. It hadn't sounded in years. People came outside, startled, blinking in the pale winter light. It rang once, then again, then silence. No one admitted to pulling the rope. No prints were found in the snow. And from that day forward, most villagers stopped attending Sunday service. The bell had woken something in them, something they didn't want to see. Departures by February, families began to leave. The Gellers moved to Stonevale. Miss Langley resigned from the school. Francis Lee sold the store to an investor who never opened it again. Jack stayed. So did Mrs. Hicks. But the village was no longer whole. By summer, only 14 residents remained, and no one ever spoke of the missing month. The tape years later, a radio technician in Stonevale discovered something buried in an old frequency archive. It was a transmission recorded accidentally from a scanner monitoring emergency lines during the month of silence. Most of it was static. But just before the end, a voice whispered through. It was quiet, barely audible. "We were never alone in the sleep." Then the recording cut out. No one knows who said it. No one recognizes the voice, and no one is sure if it was meant as a warning or something else entirely. What they couldn't explain after the villagers woke up, the world expected closure, answers, a statement, a cause, something that could fit neatly into a report, a press conference, a footnote in medical literature. But that's not what they got. Instead, the stillness lingered. The people of Eldam Ridge returned to their homes, but they didn't return to themselves. They moved slower, spoke less. They laughed politely, but their eyes never quite caught up. Something was missing. Not just the memory of 30 days, but something softer, deeper, a thread of connection that had been quietly cut. Doctors came and went. Scanners buzzed. Tests were run. Blood was drawn. But the results were fine. No brain damage. No exposure to toxins. No anomalies in diet, sleep cycles, respiration, or heart rhythm. Everything looked normal, but nothing felt normal. The unsaid sum of the villagers had thoughts they didn't share. Caroline Hicks began locking her doors for the first time in decades, not because she feared break-ins, but because something inside her told her she shouldn't trust the night. Jack Whitlow started having gaps in his afternoons, moments where he found himself staring out at the hills, not remembering why he was there or for how long. The Geller twins, just before they moved away, drew a picture. It showed the village, buried under snow, with everyone sleeping, and something standing in the trees. When asked what it was, Abby just said it didn't have a name. Monica folded the picture and put it in a drawer. She never looked at it again. No closure. The officials stopped coming. The tests ended. The articles dried up. The case was marked unresolved environmental event. Classified, archived, forgotten by most, but not by those who were there. Because long after the bodies woke up, the silence stayed. In the cracks of old floorboards, in the hum of radios, in the way a breeze would stop just before entering the village. Even years later, visitors described a strange stillness in the air, a feeling that time hadn't fully restarted, a kind of echo from a sleep that went too deep, a pause the world didn't know how to unpause. And while the waking was impossible to explain, what came next was even stranger. None of them move. None of them stir. Their chests rise and fall, slowly, evenly, as if dreaming a dream they'll never remember. And then time stretched out. Days turned into weeks. Snow covered the paths completely. The houses faded into white shapes. Still, no smoke from chimneys. No laughter. No footfalls. Only the trees whispered. Only the branches shifted. One soldier stationed at the perimeter later said, "We'd sit in silence, watching it. Sometimes you thought you saw someone move, but they never did. The longer you stared, the more it felt like the village was staring back, until no warning came, no message was sent, no announcement was made. On the 30th day, just after dawn, something changed. No light flashed, no bells rang, no wind howled. It was quiet. And then, as if exhaling all at once, Eldam Ridge woke up. But that's a story for the next chapter. Dreamless and untouched, even after the people of Eldam Ridge woke up, the mystery didn't end. If anything, it deepened. There had been hope at first, that the awakening would bring answers, that the villagers would remember something, a dream, a voice, a place they had visited in their minds, anything to explain where they had been for 30 days. But when questioned, every single resident said the same thing. Nothing. No dreams, no sensations, just the memory of going to sleep, and then opening their eyes. 30 days, lost like a dropped coin in a river, gone without a ripple. The medical lens, Dr. Wesley Tran was among the first medical specialists brought in to examine the villagers after their awakening. A neurologist from the capital, he had studied coma states, sleep disorders, and rare cases of fugue. But nothing in his books had prepared him for this. He began with the basics: reflexes, memory, recall, emotional response. The villagers scored normally on every chart. They're functioning as if nothing happened, he told his team on day 2, which is remarkable and deeply troubling. He ran brain scans, electroencephalograms, thermal imaging, chemical panels, sleep assessments, but the results were unremarkable. Slight dehydration, minor muscular atrophy, slightly reduced caloric levels, but cognitively, nothing wrong, and nothing right either. Because something was missing, not in the results, but in the patterns, to quiet inside. In typical sleep, the human brain enters cycles, REM stages, theta waves, deep delta rhythms, dreams form, the subconscious stirs, night is busy beneath the surface. But when Dr. Tran reviewed the EEG recordings from a handful of villagers monitored during their first nights after waking, he frowned. There were no REM cycles, no dream formation. Even after their return to normal life, their brains were quiet at night, resting but not reaching. It was as if a part of them had been turned off and hadn't turned back on. "We are not built to sleep without dreaming," he wrote in his notes. "Something fundamental has changed." Caroline's journal, Caroline Hicks, ever a creature of habit, kept a journal. She had done so for nearly 20 years, a simple, handwritten log of her days. Nothing fancy, no grand thoughts, just weather notes, what she fed the cats who passed by her window. After the awakening, she began writing again, but the first entry after her sleep read, "Woke late. Strange dreams, but already gone. Kitchen cold. Soup still on stove." It was the only time she used the word dreams. In her next entries, the tone shifted. "Quiet today. Cats look at me differently. Neighbors' wind chime sounds deeper than I remember. Lower, like it's slowed down. Couldn't remember what I was doing. Lost 20 minutes standing in front of the oven." She never told the doctors about these things, and they didn't ask. The Geller twins, Abby and June, just 9 years old, seemed unaffected at first. They played, they laughed, they went sledding behind the schoolhouse, but their drawings changed. Where once they had sketched smiling suns, snowmen, animals, and flowers, now they drew houses with no windows, a forest with eyes, dark hills with small figures standing in lines. Monica, their mother, tried to ignore it at first. She smiled, said they had active imaginations. But at night, she heard them whispering in their room, not in fear, but in a tone she didn't recognize. One night, she asked Abby what they were talking about. Abby looked up and replied quietly, "We were trying to remember the name." Monica blinked. The name of who? Abby hesitated. The one who stood by the bed. Something in the quiet. Not everyone in Eldam Ridge admitted to strange thoughts. But small things happened that no one could ignore. The general store radio turned on by itself, always too static. Batteries drained more quickly. Clocks slowed down in certain houses. And when people walked past the chapel, they sometimes paused without knowing why, as if expecting someone to be standing just inside the door. Some residents developed odd habits. Jack Whitlow began sleeping with the light on, something he'd never done. Caroline Hicks began locking her bedroom door from the inside. Francis Lee refused to open the back room of his shop. "I keep hearing the tea kettle boil," he said once, "but there's no water on the stove." The observer, a man named Dr. Emil Voss, arrived 3 weeks after the awakening. He was not from the hospital. He came in an unmarked vehicle, wore a long wool coat, and carried a leather notebook. He did not introduce himself to the villagers. He simply watched. He sat near the schoolhouse in the afternoons, quietly taking notes. He walked the outer perimeter at dawn. He stared at the chapel for long stretches, never blinking. One soldier, who had been on duty since the initial lockdown, asked him plainly, "Are you from the agency?" Dr. Voss smiled and replied, "I'm here to listen," but no one heard him speak to anyone. One morning, he was gone. His notebook was never recovered. It read, but a scrap of paper was found under the cot he had slept on. It was not a coma. It was a door. Collective silence. No one in Eldam Ridge could recall anything from the missing month. Not 1 second. Not one image. And yet, they all shared a new fear of being alone in the dark. By February, more families left. "It's not what happened," one man told a reporter. "It's what didn't happen. The fact that we lost a month, and we feel nothing. That's the worst part." Even now, years later, most of those who remained say they sleep less, that they dream in fragments, small, colorless pieces that don't connect to anything real. And sometimes they wake with tears on their faces, unsure why. The final test. In March, a team from the National Research Council arrived with one final set of instruments. They wanted to measure the town's electromagnetic field, not because they expected to find anything, but because nothing else had worked. They placed sensors near the chapel, the schoolhouse, the general store. They left them overnight. The next morning, all the recordings were blank. No static, no interference, no signal at all. Just a long, perfect void. They packed their equipment and left without comment. One technician, on the drive home, whispered to his colleague, "That place, it doesn't want to be measured." Left behind, Jack Whitlow remained. So did Caroline. So did 3 others. They tended their homes, chopped wood, fed animals. They didn't speak often. And when they did, their conversations were slow and quiet. The snow eventually melted. Spring came. Flowers bloomed. But the village stayed unchanged. Time moved forward, but the stillness, the untouched silence, remained, as if the sleep had left a mark, not on their bodies, but on the air itself, like a layer of frost that never truly melts. The village beneath the silence. Some places change after tragedy, others do not. They wear their history like stone, heavy, unmoving, quietly watching as people come and go. Eldam Ridge did not change after the month of sleep, at least not in the way the world expected. The roads were cleared, the fences repaired, the windows scrubbed, the shops reopened, briefly. But the village itself remained the same snowfall, the same stillness, the same quiet rhythm that no one could quite explain. And that, perhaps, was what made it so unsettling. What was missing? No signs of trauma, no memory of the event, no source of infection, no bodies, no graves. What happened in Eldam Ridge left no fingerprints. It didn't follow the rules of exposure, or hysteria, or psychological contagion. It behaved like something else entirely, like a shadow that passed over the town and left no measurable evidence behind. And yet, everyone who visited said the same thing. They felt it. They felt watched, not by cameras, not by people, but by the absence itself, as if the silence had a memory, The outsiders. After the medical teams left, other kinds of visitors came. Not doctors, not journalists, others. Men in plain suits with no badges. Women who asked questions about the church records, but didn't write anything down. Young researchers with handmade devices and quiet voices who never introduced themselves properly. They stayed in nearby motels. They walked the town at night. They collected soil, air, and water samples. And then, without warning, they vanished. No reports published, no footage leaked, no explanations. Only whispers that something about Eldam Ridge had made them uneasy. A still point in a moving world, while the outside world rushed ahead. Elections, weather, holidays. Eldam Ridge became something else. A place caught between seconds. A snow globe that no one dared to shake. Time passed in measurable ways. The sun still rose and set. The seasons rotated. The trees budded, then shed their leaves again. But inside the village, the pace was slower. Children walked in pairs, never alone. Doors were locked earlier in the evening. Old songs were hummed, but never finished. And always the same feeling. Like waking up in a room you've never seen before, but knowing something is waiting just outside the door. Rumors and retellings in nearby towns. The story of Eldam Ridge became legend. The sleeping village, the 30th night, the silence in the snow. Teenagers dared each other to sneak in and take photos. They left before sunset. Writers tried to fictionalize it. They changed the names, set it in a forest, or a desert, or a church camp. None of them got it right, because the strangest part of the story was that there was no story, no horror, no monster, no outbreak, just the absence. Just the fact that people, living, breathing people, had been taken out of time, not harmed, not changed, just returned, and no one could say what had held them. The sound that wasn't there. One visitor, a sound engineer named Ray, brought high-sensitivity microphones to Eldam Ridge in the spring after the event. He set them up overnight, hoping to capture ambient village noise. The rustle of leaves, wind, owls, the normal music of any sleeping place. But what he recorded was stranger. Nothing. Not a trace of ambient sound. No crickets, no distant engines, no flutter of wings. When he amplified the track, he heard something else. Not noise, but pressure. A low, rolling absence, like being inside a shell. Ray called it the hum of missing time. He never returned. Something lingered, even the animals knew. Birds flew over the ridge, but rarely landed. Foxes skirted the outer edge. A stray dog once wandered in, and was later found lying quietly at the base of the schoolhouse steps, asleep but unresponsive. It woke a week later, barking madly, and refused to go near the town again. Something had taken root in the quiet, something that no longer needed to act, because it had already done what it came to do. The ones who stayed, Caroline Hicks, never moved away. She said she was too old to start over. But her letters to an old friend told another story. There's something different about me, Jean. I forget things now, not just memories, but time itself. I'll look at the clock and realize an hour has passed without knowing what I was doing. Sometimes I hear music when I sleep, not notes, not melody, just rhythm, like something breathing under the floorboards. And sometimes I wake up standing at the window, like I'm waiting for someone. She stopped writing 6 months later. No one heard from her again. The map that changed. A cartographer working for a regional atlas publisher noticed something odd during a routine update. Satellite images of Eldam Ridge were unusually blurry. Not out of focus, just slightly distorted, like the resolution failed to hold in the center of the village. Zoom in too far, and the pixels broke apart. Zoom out, and the ridge seemed to bend slightly away from the rest of the landscape. He submitted the image with a note. Geospatial inconsistency near Eldam Ridge. Possibly a lens issue. The note was never addressed, and the next edition of the atlas excluded the village entirely. Unfinished dreams. Some who visited Eldam Ridge after the event reported unusual sleep afterward. Dreams that ended abruptly. Sleep paralysis. Vivid impressions of standing still in white rooms with no doors. One woman described dreaming of the schoolhouse bell, ringing endlessly, but with no sound. She woke up sobbing and couldn't explain why. Another man claimed he dreamt of snow that fell upward, each flake a whisper, each whisper the same phrase, repeating without end. You were there, you were there, you were there. He didn't know what it meant, and he stopped dreaming entirely 3 months later. What stayed behind in the end, it wasn't what the sleep had done to the villagers that unsettled people. It was what it had done to the village, a change in rhythm, a shift in how time flowed, a new layer of silence that didn't feel accidental. Eldam Ridge had become a place just slightly out of step with the rest of the world. Still beautiful, still cold, still gentle, but not untouched. The air remembered, the windows remembered, the soil remembered. Even if the people didn't. And now, after all that silence, all that watching and wondering, something is about to shift again. Because the story isn't over. The villagers have returned to their homes. Their bodies have healed. Their days have restarted. But what woke them? What reached into that deep, quiet month and whispered? Now, that's the question that remains. And it's time to ask it. The awakening and the silence that followed. They awoke all at once, not gradually, not in waves. It was as though a great unseen conductor had raised a silent baton, and at some invisible cue, 41 people opened their eyes. The residents of Eldam Ridge sat up in their beds, stepped out of their chairs, or rose from wherever they had last been, as if no time had passed at all. Outside, frost coated every surface. Inside, fires had long gone cold. Milk in the fridge had turned sour. Clocks were blinking 12 o'clock, and yet no one screamed. There was no panic, no shock, only confusion wrapped in quiet. Ordinary movements. Caroline Hicks shuffled to the kitchen and turned on the kettle, out of habit more than intention. She stood at the window, watching the early light bleed across the snow, and thought for a long time that she'd overslept by a few hours. She tapped her watch, checked the wall calendar, December 5th. That couldn't be right. Jack Whitlow looked around his workshop and saw the engine parts he had laid out the day before, now lightly dusted with frost. His coffee mug had frozen solid. He picked it up, stared at it, then set it down again. At the Geller house, Monica walked into the twins' bedroom and found them already dressed and sitting at the foot of the bed, staring at the door. No one said the word sleep. No one questioned where they had been, because none of them knew they had been gone. The ones who knew. But outside the village, in tents and military vehicles, in field offices and hospital wings, people knew. When the monitoring systems detected movement in all 41 households simultaneously, alarms triggered in 3 different regions. Medical teams were mobilized. Psychologists and linguists and intelligence officers packed bags. They expected panic, hysteria, rage. They got none of it. Instead, they arrived to find calm confusion. Villagers sitting on porches, blinking at the sunlight. Children walking slowly through the snow. Doors open, stoves relit, radios turned on. They were too calm, one response officer said later. Not sedated, not drugged, just emotionally flat, like they'd missed a page of the script. The questions the first round of interviews were soft, gentle, carefully phrased. Do you remember the date you went to sleep? Did you dream? Did you see anything unusual before you lost consciousness? The answers were all the same. No, no, nothing. Some asked for the time. A few were surprised to learn the month had changed. But no one wept, no one broke down. Even the children seemed unaffected. It's like they've returned from a place that didn't have emotion, said Dr. Tran, one of the lead consultants. Not joy, not sorrow, just a kind of weightless nothing. He took special note of one answer, written in his notebook in quiet disbelief. Caroline Hicks, when asked what she remembered, had said, "It was like closing your eyes during a blink, but longer." Changes over the following days, subtle shifts emerged. Most residents began sleeping less. They reported restlessness at night, not insomnia, but an inability to surrender fully to rest. Caroline stayed up past midnight most evenings, even though she never used to. Jack left his lights on. The Geller twins refused to be alone in a room for more than a few minutes. And while none of them could remember the sleep, all of them began to fear returning to it. Not because it had hurt them, but because it had left no trace. One morning, Monica Geller was heard whispering to herself while washing dishes. What if we don't wake up next time? The bell rings again. The chapel bell rang for the first time in years. No one was seen pulling the rope. It rang just once, and that was enough. Within hours, the story began to travel. Neighbors called family. News stations were alerted. Headlines appeared in small local papers. The sleeping village has awakened. Mystery still surrounds Eldam Ridge. But the villagers refused interviews. They closed their curtains. They unplugged their phones. Not because they didn't care, but because they were afraid that talking about it would bring it back. They had returned to a world that hadn't waited for them, and now they weren't sure they belonged in it anymore. The village shifts over the next few weeks. Something in the town's rhythm changed. The church was boarded up. The schoolhouse was emptied. The general store was cleaned, then closed. People began to leave. Some went quietly under cover of early morning fog. Others announced it to neighbors, though no one really asked where they were going. By spring, only a dozen homes remained occupied. Those who stayed rarely spoke to each other. They moved through their days with politeness, but no warmth. It was as if the sleep had not only removed their memories, but their tether to each other. The village was no longer a place of community. It was a place of echo. Dreams that weren't dreams. Some began to report dreams, but not like before. These were not surreal or symbolic. They were flat, featureless, uncolored. Jack Whitlow wrote down one such dream in a notebook. I am standing in a hallway. There are doors on either side. None of them have handles. I am not afraid. I am not moving. There is a sound behind one of the doors, like something pacing. It never stops. Caroline described a recurring image, a room full of clocks, all ticking at different speeds, none of them showing the same time. Others dreamt of numbers, or staircases, or a feeling of falling. Not fast, not violent, just endlessly slow. Letters from elsewhere. Months after the awakening, strange letters began to arrive. No stamps, no names, no return address, just envelopes, placed under doors, in mailboxes, inside folded newspapers. Each one contained a single sentence. You are not alone. The silence watches. What sleeps once can sleep again. Some thought it was a prank. Others burned the letters without reading them aloud. One man posted his note to a tree outside the chapel. It read, "Do not look for it. It already knows your name." The final departure, a year after the awakening. Only 5 residents remained. Jack, Caroline, a couple in their 70s, and a man who never gave his name, but swept the chapel steps every morning at dawn. They no longer asked why the sleep happened. They only asked why they were allowed to wake up. Jack, in a rare moment of conversation with Caroline, said softly, "Maybe it let us go, or maybe it forgot to keep us." She nodded, but didn't respond. Some questions are better left unspoken. What we know, the event, officially labeled anomalous temporal quiescence, was never publicly explained. The files were closed. Nothing. The village was removed from certain maps. Sensors remained, buried discreetly beneath the snow, silently recording. The scientific world moved on. Most forgot, but not everyone. Each winter, when the first heavy snowfall covers Eldam Ridge, someone always remembers. A former doctor might find themselves staring too long at the frost on a window pane. A child who lived nearby may dream of a house with no lights, and a voice saying, "It's not time yet," and somewhere far from the ridge, a man with no recorded identity sits quietly with a leather notebook, turning its pages one at a time. He does not speak, but if he did, he might say, "They came back too soon." The silence that stayed Eldam Ridge still exists, but it is no longer a village. It is a memory pressed into snow, a silence held between branches, a story that whispers only when no one is listening. The people are gone, but the stillness remains. It waits without waiting. It breathes without sound. It dreams without color. And if you visit, if you walk through the empty streets on a cold morning, you may feel it brush against you, a pause in your thoughts, a moment where time forgets to tick. A strange pull, asking nothing, offering nothing, only stillness. The lost files, the document, was never supposed to surface. It wasn't in a public archive. It wasn't referenced in reports. It wasn't meant to exist, and yet it did. A single manila folder, unmarked except for the initials EV, found tucked inside an old filing cabinet purchased from a liquidated research office outside the capital. The pages inside were handwritten, neat, precise, signed only as Dr. Emil Voss. Most of the entries were dated between January 8th and February 14th, the month following the awakening in Eldam Ridge. What you are about to hear is a reconstruction, pieced together from that journal. There is no confirmation that Dr. Voss ever officially visited Eldam Ridge, but once you hear what he wrote, you may understand why. Entry 1, January 8. I arrived at the ridge today by invitation, or suggestion, rather, from a contact who owes me nothing but fear. The village is smaller than I expected, snowbound, quiet, too quiet. The military has mostly withdrawn. The cleanup crews are packing the last of their sensors. The residents are awake, walking, speaking, nodding politely. But I don't believe they're here, as if they're sensing with a rhythm I can't hear. Not entirely. There's a drag in their gaze, a pause between sentences. I've seen this before. Once, in a monastery in the north in 1998. But that's another report. Entry 2, January 10th. Observed 7 residents today. No signs of trauma, no visible illness, but time behaves oddly here. My watch lags behind by minutes every day, even after resetting. Birdsong doesn't echo in the village the way it should. Sound seems thinner. Heard the same wind gust repeat itself 3 times, exactly the same. I stood outside the schoolhouse for 15 minutes. Looped, I recorded it. Playback shows no anomaly, yet I know what I heard. Entry 3, January 12th. Visited the chapel today. Door was unlocked. Air was still. No one else inside. Yet it smelled faintly of something. Sweet. Not incense. Not rot, like spoiled fruit. Beneath the pulpit, I found scratch marks on the wood. Small, parallel, as if made by fingernails. No record of services since the sleep. Chapel was unused before that, according to reports. Who scratched the wood? Entry for January 13th. Found a strange residue behind the general store. Transparent, gel-like. Collected a sample. Dried into flakes within 2 hours. Analysis pending. Animals avoid that part of the street. Even the birds. At night, I stood outside and listened. Heard nothing. No crickets. No shifting trees. And then, a low tone. Barely there. Not a hum. Not a machine. A single note held steady. Vibrating through the soles of my shoes. Gone when I turned my head. Returned when I closed my eyes. Entry 5, January 15th. Spoke with resident Jack W. briefly. He answered questions plainly. Said he felt fine, just quieter. He doesn't remember anything between December 5th and January 4th. But when I asked how many days he believed had passed, he said, "I think we're still inside it." Then smiled, like it was a joke. I don't think he was joking. Entry 6, January 18th. Woke up standing. 3:47 was in my socks. Standing beside the window. Don't remember rising. Don't remember dreaming. Street was empty, but I felt watched. Not from the outside, from underneath. Like the earth itself was holding its breath. I've stopped sleeping in the main room. Entry 7, January 20th. Reviewed Government Report number 47C. Large sections redacted. But one phrase survived in the margins. Residual coherence field lingers beyond consciousness boundaries. It's gibberish, scientifically, but metaphorically, it makes too much sense. This village still thinks it's asleep. Entry 8, January 22nd. There's something wrong with the sky. No one notices. The clouds pass normally. The stars shine, but they're slightly out of place. Polaris, the North Star, is 3 degrees off from where it should be. I measured twice, compared with data from nearby town. Only here is it misaligned. The sky above Eldam Ridge is not the same sky. Entry 9, January 23rd. I believe the village is a boundary, a fold in time, perhaps, or a gap. Maybe the sleep was not caused by something entering, but by something leaving. The residents were emptied. Their absence was a byproduct. They don't remember, because what happened to them didn't happen inside their own minds. It happened in the space around them. A pause in presence. A removal of self. Entry 10, January 26th. Dreamt of a staircase. Stone, worn, leading down into a space with no walls. I wasn't walking. I was being shown. A voice said, "You saw them sleep, but who watched them from below?" Woke up gasping. The temperature in my room had dropped 8 degrees. My boots were wet. I had not left my bed. Entry 11. January 30th. Caroline Hicks watched me today. She was standing at her window, still, eyes blank, following me as I walked past. Later, she waved and smiled, invited me for tea. We sat in her kitchen. The clock behind her had stopped. The hands were pointing at 3:31, same as the night I heard the tone beneath the earth. She asked if I believed in places that could dream. I asked what she meant. Somewhere has to hold the dreams we don't remember, she said. And sometimes, maybe that place gets tired. Entry 12. February 2nd. Felt it again last night. The pressure behind the eyes. The shift in air. Walked to the chapel. The bell rope was swaying gently. No wind. When I touched the door, I saw something. A flash. A room. Circular. White. No doors. No light source. And 41 chairs. All empty. The vision lasted less than a second. When I opened my eyes, my hand was bleeding. Entry 13. February 4th. I am being watched. Not by the villagers. Not by the government. By something older, quieter. It doesn't move. It waits. It listens through the frost. It watches through the stillness. It doesn't want anything. It doesn't need anything. It simply wants to know. Will we sleep again? Entry 14. Final. I've packed my notes. They won't reach anyone unless I leave. But I can't leave. Not yet. There's more to see. Something is going to happen. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. It's in the rhythm. The pauses between sounds, the space between seconds. The village is not done, and neither am I. If this is my last entry, then let it be clear, this was not an accident. They were selected. Eldom Ridge is not asleep. It's dreaming with its eyes open. The journal ends there. Dr. Emil Voss was never seen again. The building where the file was discovered has since been demolished. The person who found it does not wish to be identified. But the folder, the handwriting, and the timing match official records, all except for one detail. There is no record of Dr. Emil Voss ever being born. We came back too soon. The letter had no name, no return address, only 4 words typed at the center of the page. You forgot the chapel. It arrived folded inside a library book that hadn't been touched in years. A copy of Collected Folk Tales of Northern Counties, last checked out by a woman named Monica Geller 7 years earlier. She read the note 3 times before placing it quietly on the kitchen table. Then, without telling anyone, she packed a bag, locked the door, and drove east toward Eldom Ridge. The return. It had been over 6 years since Monica had left. She never meant to go back. After the sleep, after the silence, she and the twins had moved to Stonevale, started over. New school, new routines, different curtains, different clocks, but not different enough, because the sleep had changed something, not just in the body, not just in the brain, but in the space around her. She could feel it in her daughter's drawings, in the way sunlight hit their windows wrong, in the way, once or twice a year, they would pause mid-sentence and whisper, "I think it's happening again." It never did, but they felt it. She felt it. And now, here she was, just outside the village, parked by the stone marker, the one that read Eldom Ridge, Pop 41. The paint was peeling. There was no wind. There never was. A village in waiting. Monica stepped out of the car and looked around. The general store was shuttered. The chapel's windows were fogged. No birds called, no boots in the snow. She began walking, slowly, down the main street. The houses were mostly empty now, curtains drawn, gardens wild. but the structures stood as if they had been waiting, holding still in case someone came back. When she reached her old house, she hesitated. The porch sagged more than she remembered. The steps groaned under her boots, and when she opened the door, it didn't resist. No dust, no cobwebs. The air was cold, but clean, like someone had just left. Ghosts of the familiar, the furniture was where she'd left it. The twins' artwork still pinned to the refrigerator. A stuffed rabbit sat on the windowsill, eyes faded from the sun. The oven light flickered when she opened it, briefly illuminating a cast iron pan, clean and dry. Her breath fogged in the kitchen, but she didn't shiver. Instead, she walked to the hallway mirror and stared at her reflection. It was her, and not her, older, heavier, but behind the eyes, something else. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the letter. You forgot the chapel. So she went. The door that didn't open the chapel was at the top of the hill, just past the schoolhouse. Monica had walked that path hundreds of times. She knew every bend, every stone, but today the path seemed longer. She reached the door and tried the handle. Locked. She knocked once, twice, no reply. She pressed her ear to the wood, and for a moment she heard something, a soft creak, a breath, or maybe just wind. But there was no wind. She turned away, and that's when she saw the light in the schoolhouse window. The unexpected stranger. The schoolhouse had been closed for years. No lights, no heating, no reason for anything to be left on, and yet one window glowed faintly yellow. She walked toward it. Inside, a man stood by the chalkboard, tall, thin, wool coat, gray hair. He didn't turn when she entered, didn't speak. He was writing something on the board in neat, white strokes. Words, "We came back too soon." He stepped aside. The sentence sat alone, etched in chalk. No context, no punctuation. He turned slowly to face her. His eyes were sharp, but kind. You remember it, don't you? She blinked. I don't know what I remember. He nodded. That's why you came back. The conversation that didn't end. They sat in the old teacher's chair and spoke for a long time. Not about details, not about science, but about feelings. The way time had started behaving differently after the sleep. The dreams that didn't start or end. The spaces in their minds that felt repainted. New shapes under old wallpaper. He asked if she still forgot entire hours. She said yes. He asked if her daughters still whispered at the same time. She nodded. Then she asked him a question. Did it let us go? He tilted his head. Or did it just look away? Another night, Monica stayed in her old house that night. She lit a fire, made tea, sat on the edge of her bed, and waited. She wasn't sure for what. There was no sound outside, no cars, no wildlife. At some point, she must have closed her eyes, because when she opened them, the fire had burned out. The tea was cold, and the light from the window was slightly different, duller. She looked at her hands. Her skin was pale, her fingertips numb. She walked to the mirror, and the reflection wasn't her, not entirely. The silence returns. She left the next morning, before the sun was fully up. Didn't say goodbye, didn't write a note, just stepped into the car and drove. As the village disappeared in the rearview mirror, she noticed something odd. Her reflection wasn't in the mirror, not the car's mirror, not the side windows. Only when she blinked and turned away did her face return. She didn't drive straight home. She stopped once, just outside Stonevale. She sat in the car, unmoving, and whispered to no one. We weren't meant to wake up. An email that wasn't sent 3 weeks later. A draft email was found in her account. It had no recipient, no subject. It read, "We're dreaming again. I feel it at the edge of the day, in the places between hours. It isn't done with us. I think we came back too soon. I think next time it won't forget to keep us." The return of the stranger later that spring. A maintenance worker at the Stonevale Library found a man standing near the folklore shelves. He was reading a book that no longer existed in their catalog. He didn't speak. He didn't check the book out. He left it on the counter and walked away. Inside the book was a single pressed flower, pale, dry, and unfamiliar. On the inside cover, someone had written in fading black ink, "We woke because it blinked. Next time, it will keep its eyes open." The dream that spreads in the months that followed. Others began to report dreams, not of the village itself, but of things that felt like Eldam Ridge. Rooms where time had no rules, clocks with hands that spun the wrong way, chairs arranged in circles, whispers in cold stairwells, just wrong. People described them in identical terms, not nightmares. More than one person said they saw someone standing beside the bed, watching, not cruel, not curious, just waiting. Closing the chapter. Monica never returned to Eldam Ridge again. But sometimes the chapel key appears in her coat pocket, or a handful of snow is found on the kitchen floor. Even in July, the sleep may have ended, but the question never did. The first time it happened, long before Eldam Ridge, there was Orlinsk, a village buried in the white plains of Siberia, far beyond the last marked rail lines. It did not appear on any modern map. No census ever listed its name. But in the year 1897, something occurred there that has never been explained. Something that would later echo in other places, under other names. Something that would be called an event, or an anomaly, or unclassified environmental collapse. But back then, it was simply called the Long Sleep, and this is the only account that survived. The archivists note the story you are about to hear was discovered in 1952, locked inside a private archive beneath the Russian State Library in Moscow. It was handwritten in French, bound in leather, and sealed with red wax. The title on the front, Journal de la Nuit Blanche, Journal of the White Night. The author, Etienne, a French railway surveyor contracted by the Russian Empire to map eastern expansion routes. The journal was marked confidential and hidden with dozens of unrelated logs. What you are about to hear is not fiction, at least not to Etienne. April 3rd, 1897, we passed through Kazan without delay. From there, into snow and smoke. I have not seen a village for hours. The landscape is hollowed, like the world here has forgotten to finish itself. My translator, Mikhail, says the next settlement is Orlinsk. Fewer than 50 people. No post office. No church. I wonder why the tracks were meant to pass near it. We arrive tomorrow, April 4th, 1897. Arrival, the village is still. No children in the street. No animals in the yard. Not even smoke from chimneys. At first, I assumed it was Sunday silence. But when we knocked, no one answered. The doors were not locked. Inside, people slept. All of them, in beds, on chairs, on the floor. They looked peaceful, breathing, alive, but they would not wake. Mikhail shouted in Russian. I tapped shoulders, checked pulses. Nothing. Even the dogs were still. Something is wrong. April 5th, they have not stirred. I placed a mirror to each mouth. It fogs, they breathe, but they do not dream. No eye movement, no murmurs, no shifts of the body. We lit a fire outside the largest home. The smoke climbed in perfect stillness. Snow falls in flakes, too slow for the wind. Time is strange here. April 6th. The note: we found something in the schoolhouse. A note, written in pale ink on the back of a map. Only 4 words, in old Russian script. We looked too long. Mikhail said it 3 times aloud, and then refused to touch the paper again. I placed it back exactly where we found it. The schoolhouse is colder than the air outside. April 8th. An impossible sound. Last night I heard music, soft, hollow, a melody I could not place. It came from beneath the earth. Mikhail heard it too. We did not speak of it until morning. There is no church bell here, no piano, no instrument I've seen, and yet something plays when the snow falls hard. It is always the same notes, 3, rising, then falling. It stops when I breathe. April 9th. The woman this morning, one of them stood up. A woman in her 40s, gray shawl, bare feet. She opened her eyes and stared directly at me. But she did not speak. She walked to the door, opened it, looked out, then turned back and lay down again. It was as if she'd remembered she wasn't finished sleeping. I wrote her features in detail. By afternoon, I could not recall her face. April 11th. The circle, the center of the village, is a clearing, circular, perfectly flattened. No footprints remain there, not even ours. When I step into the circle, I lose all sound, not silence, absence. Mikhail refuses to enter it again. He said, "It's like being seen by something that isn't awake yet." April 13th. The whisper: we tried to leave, loaded the sledge, set off at dawn. But within 2 miles, the compass spun. The road behind us was gone. Not covered, vanished. Mikhail dropped his pack. I watched him mouth something, a word I couldn't hear. He whispered it once and began to weep. That night, he packed and fled on foot. I have not seen him since. April 14th. A thought that isn't mine. I awoke with a phrase in my mind. Not a dream, a sentence, formed fully. They slept because they listened. I do not know what it means, but I write it down here because it does not go away. April 15th. The end. I have been here 12 days. Food is running low. The fire burns too quickly. The villagers remain asleep. They are not aging, not changing, and yet something has shifted. This morning, the circle was gone. Just snow, wind, empty ground. I stood there for hours and felt nothing. And then I heard the music again. But this time, it came from inside me. Not sound, not memory, but pressure, like remembering something that hasn't happened yet. I am going to lie down in the schoolhouse now. If you find this, leave this place before it asks you to stay. Do not look too long. Do not wait to be invited. Just go. Afterward, no record of Etienne exists after April 15th, 1897. No other settlements ever reported contact with the village of Orlinsk. The route was abandoned. No rail line was built. The journal was preserved in secrecy for over 50 years. Only one researcher ever cited it, a neurologist from Warsaw, who vanished in 1964. His final lecture was titled "Shared Sleep and Non-Temporal Harmonics in Isolated Populations." No recordings survive, but a handwritten note was left at his podium. This was not the first village, and now perhaps you understand. Eldam Ridge was not the beginning. It was a repetition, a rhythm, paused and resumed, the same melody, rising and falling across time. The long sleep has many names. It wears different landscapes, but it always waits in silence, and it always asks the same thing again. Are you ready to dream? Everywhere it touched, his name was Jonas Elwood, and he worked alone, not because he preferred it, but because by the time anyone realized what he was doing, it was already too late to stop. Jonas wasn't a scientist, not officially. He was a records analyst for an international insurance conglomerate, the kind of man who reviewed thousands of pages of disaster data, compiling risk tables and historical trends. But late one evening, after 4 hours of reading about unexplained village evacuations in eastern Turkey, he noticed something strange. 3 separate towns, across 3 decades, all reported the same thing. Residents found sleeping at once, no memory upon waking, no signs of struggle, no known cause, no official follow-up. At first, Jonas thought it was coincidence. It wasn't. The first pins on the map, it started as a spreadsheet, then a folder, then a physical board in his apartment, strung with red thread and black pushpins. Eldam Ridge, Orlinsk, the town of Paradera, Argentina, 1926. An unnamed station in Greenland, 1984. The MV Chandrika, a cargo ship found adrift in the South Pacific, 1971. Crew asleep in their cabins, radio still broadcasting static. There were 24 incidents within the first 2 months of his search. Each one had been labeled something else: environmental anomaly, food poisoning, fungal outbreak, mass hysteria, but the symptoms were always the same: sudden onset, complete loss of consciousness, no physiological cause, memory loss, collective silence. The pattern beneath what troubled Jonas most wasn't what he found, it was where. Each event occurred in a location that was geographically quiet: isolated villages, ships, field stations, places without conflict, places where time could pass unnoticed. He mapped them all, and then he overlaid temporal weather data, magnetic fields, solar activity, barometric pressure. There were no patterns. Then he tried something else. He charted each location's history of sleep disorders in the years prior to the event. And suddenly, a shape began to form. All had documented spikes in sleepwalking, vivid, recurring dreams. Children muttering numbers in their sleep. One town had reported a flock of birds flying in a perfect circle above their square for 19 hours, before dropping to the ground, alive but inert. They woke a day later. So did the town. The man in the recordings, Jonas, didn't believe in ghosts or conspiracies. But when he accessed archived interviews from the Eldam Ridge event, he heard a voice he recognized. Not the words, the tone. It was the same calm voice he'd heard in a recording from the Argentine incident nearly a century earlier. Different language, same cadence, same eerie rhythm. He enhanced both recordings and ran voice pattern software. The system couldn't confirm identity, but it flagged a 98.2% match to speakers, almost 100 years apart. The same voice. The redacted journal. Weeks later, while reviewing data from a 1950s psychological study on sleep isolation, Jonas requested a transcript that had been labeled, classified, and mistakenly included in a public archive. It arrived in a sealed envelope. Inside was a journal, handwritten by a nurse stationed at a rural sanatorium in Sweden, 1954. The patients, all asleep, were drawing the same symbol when conscious. A circle surrounded by 4 smaller dots, arranged like clock points. The journal entry read, "And when the last one matches the rhythm, that's when the silence arrives. They say it's not sleep, it's waiting. Something is timing us, not with clocks, but with dreams. Jonas placed the journal next to the Eldam Ridge documentation and realized something terrifying. The symbol was scratched into the chapel floor at Eldam Ridge and into a wall on the MV Rika and drawn by a child in Greenland. The file called in Hilaire one night, while working late in the university library's restricted stacks. Jonas accessed an outdated internal database. Among the files was a folder called Inhalaire, Latin. It meant to breathe in. Inside were photos, dozens of places he hadn't seen before, a village buried in sand, a classroom in which every child had fallen asleep mid-lesson, an air traffic control tower frozen in operation, radar still spinning. Each photo had a code. Each code corresponded to a location on his map. Only a few were labeled. One, beneath the photo of a jungle village in Sumatra, read, status, not recovered. The Breathless Zone, a declassified satellite image from 2009, showed a swath of forest in northern Myanmar, dark, untouched, and unnaturally symmetrical. The trees hadn't grown for 11 years. No animals entered the zone. A hiker's bootprint found on the edge of the forest had been preserved in mud, never washed away. Locals called it the Breathless Zone. Jonas compared the coordinates to his map. Perfect alignment, the same pattern, the same radius, another pin, a global pulse. He began assigning dates to each event, then intervals between them. At first, it looked random, but a rhythm began to emerge. Every third event occurred exactly 9 years, 6 months, and 2 days after the one before. The locations followed a spiral path across the globe, not in longitude or latitude, but in resonance, a term Jonas borrowed from music. The sleep didn't travel, it echoed, and each echo left behind silence that was waiting to be reawakened. The email that ended it, Jonas compiled all of this into a single document. The sleep map, hundreds of data points, drawings, timelines, voice comparisons, chemical analyses of air and water near sites. He sent it to 10 people. All 10 replies bounced, emails erased, accounts suspended. 2 nights later, his apartment was broken into. Nothing stolen except the wall map. All red strings were cut. Only one note remained, left on his desk, typed, unsigned, 4 words. You're looking too long. The map that wasn't there, Jonas disappeared that week. But a year later, a copy of the sleep map was anonymously posted to an open-access academic server in New Zealand. It was downloaded 614 times before being removed. A backup survived. It included a final audio log recorded by Jonas. His voice is quiet, measured, tired. They aren't random. They aren't natural. Every place it touched still hums. The sleep doesn't come from outside. It's seated. When the rhythm is right, it wakes inside us. Eldam Ridge wasn't the first. It won't be the last. The map today, a hand-drawn version of the sleep map, now circulates in obscure forums. It's incomplete, blurry, missing most of the key. But some symbols remain. A spiral, a circle with 4 dots. The same 4 words in the corner. They will sleep again. They are still sleeping. It was supposed to be a satellite imaging anomaly, just a blip on a thermal scan, a patch of land in the Karakoram range, high in the northern mountains, where the snow didn't melt quite right. But when the second scan returned, the anomaly was still there, a warm signature, regular geometric shapes, too orderly to be natural, too remote to be known. There were no settlements recorded in that zone. No expeditions, no rescue history, no names. And yet the thermal image showed exactly what it looked like. A village, still standing, still warm, still breathing. The descent, they sent a team of 4. Scientists and survivalists. 1 geologist, 1 biologist, 1 translator, and 1 mountaineer. Funded by a quiet grant from an unnamed foundation. They landed at base camp by helicopter, then crossed a 3-day stretch on foot, guided only by GPS and silence. No birds overhead. No wind in the trees. Just ice. Cracking beneath boot soles. Whispering. On the 4th morning, just after sunrise, they saw it, a narrow valley, and in it, 23 buildings, arranged in a circle around a square. Rooftops sagged with snow. Icicles hung still and perfect, but there was smoke, thin wisps from chimneys, and the glow of warmth beneath the shutters. No one answers. They entered the first house with a practiced calm. It was warm inside, too warm. A small fire still burned, and next to it a man sat in a wooden chair, eyes closed, head tilted back, breathing, shallow, steady, not cold, not injured, not dead. They called to him, nothing. They touched his hand. He did not stir. In the next room, a woman lay in bed, hair brushed, a book on her chest, 1 finger tucked between pages as a bookmark. Still breathing, still asleep. House by house they split into pairs, careful, respectful, not speaking loudly. Every building was the same, people asleep, not in collapse, but arranged like life had simply paused. At the blacksmith's shop, a hammer sat mid-swing above the anvil, frozen mid-motion. The smith himself slumped nearby, as if sleep had reached him mid-thought. At the bakery, loaves had risen in the oven, untouched, unburnt, as if fire had forgotten how to finish its work. They counted 49 residents, old and young, all in perfect health, all unmoving, all still. Stillness that waits. The team documented everything. Core temperatures, air pressure, humidity, no radiation, no toxins, no biological contaminants. The village existed in perfect environmental harmony, too perfect. One of the scientists, Dr. Aya Varela, whispered on the second night, "It's not just a pause, it's a preservation." No one responded, not because they disagreed, but because speaking it aloud made it worse. The clock that ticks inside the chapel. They found a clock, a large wooden timepiece mounted above the entrance. Its second hand moved slowly, unstopping, but the time never changed, always for 32. The pendulum ticked, but the chimes never rang. It was the only sound in the entire village, a heartbeat made of wood and air. They examined it. No gears, no weights, just rhythm. The stone circle behind the village. They discovered a perfect circle of stones, each the height of a child. 21 arranged in a ring. A gap in the east-facing side. Inside the ring, nothing, not even snow. The ground was bare, dry, warm to the touch. And when one of the researchers stepped inside, their equipment failed. Batteries died. Compasses spun. Even breath felt harder to hold. They stepped out again. Everything returned. They did not step in twice. The whispered name on the third evening, the mountaineer Raoul, reported hearing something. Not voices, not wind. A single word, whispered at intervals, faint, directionless, not coming to the ear, but from inside the skull. He wrote it down, Carwin. No one recognized the word. Not in Urdu, not in Pashto, not in Latin or Greek. But it appeared again. carved faintly beneath the wooden floorboards of the schoolhouse, burned into the iron handle of the village bell, scratched into the window glass of the largest home, Carwin. No explanation, no etymology, just repetition. Some sleeps do not end. Let me begin slowly. You're still here, still listening, and maybe still awake. That makes you one of us. You've heard the hum beneath the hum, the echo behind the silence. You've walked through Eldam Ridge, stood beneath the sleep map, opened the journal from beneath the chapel floor. You've traced the circle with 4 dots, felt the stillness where the clocks stopped ticking. You've seen how a village forgets to wake, and still here you are. Not asleep, not quite dreaming, still reaching for answers, in a story that never offered any. They were just places, quiet places, forgotten towns, broken stations, vanished settlements. They did not ask to be remembered, and yet, somehow, they asked you to stay. Places where life paused in the middle of its sentence, where people were caught not by death, but by waiting. You were there. Do you remember? Do you remember Orlinsk, the woman with the notebook filled with dream maps? Do you remember Yuruka, where the air didn't move and the breath was borrowed? Do you remember the frozen chapel clock, always stuck at 4:32? Not broken, just resisting forward motion. What did it want? All this time, you may have asked. What caused it? Why did they sleep? Why did only one man stay awake? And the answer is, we don't know. Not because we haven't searched, but because the mystery refuses to be solved. It folds in on itself. It breathes, but doesn't speak. You might think the answer is out there, in some classified file, or buried cave, or lost recording. But what if the answer isn't external at all? What if the question is the point? What if the real story is the silence left behind? You were meant to hear this if you've listened this far. You were meant to hear it, not by fate, not by design, but by rhythm. Somewhere, your breath aligned, your hours tilted in just the right way. You didn't stumble here. You arrived. Not all listeners stay. Many drift off somewhere around chapter 3. Some lose the thread between the hum and the hush. But you stayed, even as the rooms darkened, even as the wind stopped speaking. You stayed. And now, you know what the silence feels like when it grows a shape. There are more places, more names, more villages with no clocks. The man who never slept once said, "They are not events. They are reminders." Reminders of what that time isn't linear, that memory can be edited, that some sleeps are collective, and not all are meant to end. Or perhaps the reminders are simpler, that you are here, that you are listening, that you remember, even when others forget. Even when the world starts spinning again, and the birds return, and the bakery reopens, you will carry the stillness, the dream that watches back. What if the sleep wasn't a side effect? What if it was the message? What if every person who went still, who forgot the days they lost, was part of something larger? What if sleep is how it listens, how it speaks, not with words, not with signs, but with synchrony? What if the spiral on the map wasn't a warning, but an invitation not to enter, but to understand what it means to stop, to truly stop, to breathe once and let the moment stretch forever? You felt it, haven't you? that pause between thoughts, that quiet panic when everything is too still. That's where it lives. The man at the edge, he still walks, not far from you, sometimes. A shadow at the side of a chapel, a reflection in a bus window, a coat left behind on a park bench. He carries no clock, no journal, only memory. He remembers the breath of every sleeping town, the face of every child that spoke in numbers. He once said, "If I sleep, the world might forget too much." So he doesn't. He just walks and watches and waits for someone else to listen. Someone like you. Your turn if your dreams begin to change now. Don't worry. If you hear a name whispered while you're half awake, don't turn too fast. And if you draw a circle with 4 dots without meaning to, don't erase it. Just note the time, mark the day, and know that somewhere, another place may be listening back. You've joined the rhythm now. There's no exit, only observation, only stillness, a final whisper. The whisper files are not meant to end. Not really. They're echoes, not episodes, reflections, not stories. They continue when you sleep. They continue when you forget, and they'll be waiting. Next time you walk through a town and the silence feels too complete, or the shadows stretch just a little too long. So let the silence carry you now. Let your breath slow. Let the hum beneath the world rise again. You are no longer outside the rhythm. You are inside it. You are part of the file. And tonight, whether you sleep or not, you will dream. Or something will dream you before the silence fades. If you're still with me, if your eyes remain open, or your breath has only just begun to slow, then this is for you. This is the last page, the end of the file, the final sound before we let the silence hold the rest. But don't worry, this ending won't explain everything. It's not here to do that. This is an ending made of gratitude and shadows and breath, because the truth is, you didn't just listen to the whisper files, you became part of them. You carried the weight of every pause, felt the hum beneath the hum, and when the world around these stories fell quiet, you kept listening, and for that, thank you. You changed the rhythm. I hope you know how rare that is. To stay with a story this slow, this strange, this quiet, in a world that rushes toward noise and answers. You chose stillness. You chose not knowing. And in doing that, you changed something. You shifted the rhythm, tilted the silence. Because stories like these, they don't exist unless someone listens. And you did. Even if you drifted. Even if you slept through half of chapter 4. Even if you only half remember the name Yuruka, or Carwin, or the man who never blinked, you showed up. You heard something most people miss. You heard the breath of a sleeping world. We were never telling ghost stories. This was never about ghosts, never about fear. It was about listening to what doesn't speak, reading what isn't written, trusting that mystery has its own shape, even when it hides in silence. Every town you heard about, every strange moment frozen in time, was an invitation to soften, to wonder. It was never about solving it, only about being with it, like sitting with someone who doesn't need to speak for you to know they're hurting, or watching, or waiting. That's what the sleep was, a moment that waits. And now you know how to wait with it. What we shared 10 stories, and something between them. The forgotten village in Eldam Ridge, the journal beneath the chapel floor, the boy who never woke, the map that spiraled inward, the village that never reappeared, and the man who saw it all and stayed awake anyway. We followed footsteps through fog, held our breath as clocks stilled, opened doors into places that did not belong to time. We did all this without ever raising our voices, without breaking the rhythm, and somehow, without ever explaining a thing. You understood. That's rare, that's powerful, that's yours now. Some sleeps are shared. If you fall asleep tonight, somewhere between this sentence and the next, you won't be alone, because someone else is listening to, in another city, in another bed, at 2:14 a.m. or 9:47 p.m. or just past dawn, and they're wondering the same things. Why do I feel like I've been here before? Why does the silence feel so personal? They're listening to the same breath you are. That's the quiet secret of the Whisper Files. Each story may seem isolated, but every listener shares the same dark, the same stillness, the same dream that stretches just beyond the edge of language. This was never about what happened. It was about how it felt when it did, and how you remembered it, even if you weren't supposed to. What happens now? Now the stories stop, but not the hum. You may still hear it in quiet hallways, in abandoned stations, in the pause between someone asking a question and realizing there's no one left to answer. And when you do, you'll know, not because of a spiral or a name carved into wood, but because your breath will slow, your fingers will still, and your mind will open to that place again. The one where we waited, the one where the sleep began. You'll remember something you can't quite place, and maybe, just maybe, you'll remember these words, or just the way they felt. My last thought, let me leave you with this. You don't have to understand a mystery to respect it. You don't have to solve a silence to carry its weight. Sometimes, the most important thing you can do is witness, and you did. You witnessed it all. The sleep, the silence, the spiral. The way time forgets things we can still feel. And even if this is the last Whisper File, you carry it now, not in memory, but in rhythm. So if you forget the stories, that's okay. Just listen. When the world goes still, it will return in its own way. In its own time, it always does. Good night, wherever you are. Thank you. Thank you for joining me, for staying, for listening longer than most would, for finding stillness in a restless world. Maybe you're awake, maybe not. It doesn't matter. You're exactly where you need to be. The whisper ends here, but the rhythm, that's forever. So sleep now, if you can.